All right, officially calling the Economic Development Commission meeting to order. Let me just get back to the agenda here. Just gonna acknowledge that we are on WEOT land. A more in-depth land acknowledgement can be found in our agenda. Can we go ahead and start roll call, please? Commissioner Ferguson?
Present.
Commissioner Johnson?
Present.
Commissioner Richardson? Present. And Commissioner Rex? And we have Commissioners Costa and Whitlatch are not available tonight. Thank you very much. Moving on to the approval of the minutes. Looks like we're approving the special meeting minutes from November 29th and the regular minutes from April 17th. Would one of you like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I will make a motion.
Love the enthusiasm. Alrighty. Motion and seconded. You said vote. Is that what you just said? Yeah. Yeah. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. I am seeing no old business. So jumping into new business, we have some guests here today. Firstly, we're going to discuss the vacant building ordinance. We have the city attorney, Autumn Luna, here to go over the ordinance with us. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners, and thank all of you for being here and for agreeing to review and provide direction on this ordinance. It's been a ordinance draft a long time in the making. This came about after our strategic visioning last year in 2023. The City Council and staff during strategic visioning decided that something should be crafted to address vacant and boarded buildings in Eureka. And we do have and have had for some time an ordinance called the Vacant and or Boarded Buildings Ordinance. And so there was quite a bit of discussion last year with Public Works and Code Enforcement about whether or not that existing ordinance addressed the concerns of the community and the direction of council, and if not, why not, and whether it could be simply amended and updated. And what we decided was, first, that the very idea of boarded buildings being sort of baked into part of the solution for vacancy was not in line with what council and community members had expressed. And so first, I wanted to take the word boarded out of the ordinance altogether. And so again, after much discussion, we decided that the way to go was simply to repeal and replace that old ordinance with a new one. And so that's what you have in front of you, is a draft of an ordinance that has been through quite a bit of internal review. Code enforcement especially has provided a lot of feedback, and that's been really important because, of course, they're going to be primarily on the streets enforcing this ordinance. And so from that perspective, I wanted to make sure that what was written was going to work for them as boots on the ground addressing these issues. But of course, also from the other side, and this is sort of what I'm hoping that the four of you tonight can help me with in particular, is reading it from the perspective of individuals not charged with enforcing it necessarily, but perhaps with explaining it to community members and articulating how it's supposed to work for individuals who may have a vacant building and may want to come into compliance with the law. So with that, I will turn it over for questions, and I'm happy to get in the weeds on this ordinance. It's pretty lengthy. It's a little longer than I wanted it to be, actually, but there's a lot here, and I think that it works well. But when it comes to that kind of flow, I'm very interested to hear what you all have to say, and I'd be happy to take those recommendations back to staff, modify the ordinance then before taking it on to council.
Absolutely. Well, I will just jump right into the weeds then if no one has a problem with that. I would say, it is a very lengthy ordinance, but I also think it's very well written. So I want to throw that out there. It was made for some great light reading during one of my Zoom meetings. Don't tell them this after. I think that a couple of different things that popped out to me. Based off of the public comment from this was a public comment from Nancy Olson regarding the 15-day notice. I do think that perhaps there is some truth to that. That 15-day initial notice may be a bit on the short side. Particularly sometimes people can be out of town or on vacation or what have you. I know that sometimes that certainly happened to me before, as not as a business owner, but as someone effectively running a business in the area. So I could see 30 days being a more reasonable, because ultimately, it feels to me like the intent of this is just to do something and to get the ball rolling, right? I think as long as something's happening, even as someone who's really concerned about urban blight and vacancy, the difference between something happening 15 days or 30 days, as long as something's happening, right? That's,
Sure.
That's my first thought there. And that actually, my one other thought before I'll actually, sorry, two other thoughts. Like I said, I'm only in the weeds here. Was there any, when you were drafting this, was there any precedent language that you were working off of? Or is this an example from, say, another city or municipality that has used similar language before?
Yeah, we certainly polled other cities to see whether or not other agencies were doing this kind of thing. I'll be honest, it was so long ago that I drafted this first draft. I can't tell you which cities we found ordinances from, but we certainly did find ordinances, and we didn't start from scratch. Although this has been reworked substantially, and I don't think in its current form it looks a whole lot like what others are doing. I think this one's better.
Would you mind? I'm curious. Would you mind speaking to those improvements you see?
Well, in spite of it being relatively long, I think it reads in a way that allows folks who are trying to understand its purpose to follow kind of a timeline, right? First, building vacant. Second, you see the ways in which you can come into compliance by either, or not be in violation rather, by either being in a permitted rebuild or remodel situation, or actively trying to rent or lease or sell your building that's not in violation of any nuisance or other code issues. And then the monitoring program, the fee, and also an ability to get a hearing if you disagree with the determination of the city. So I think there's a better flow here. But again, if that doesn't seem true to any of you, I'm happy to continue to rework. But this just a lot of thought went into this, and a lot of folks had their hands on it, and so for those reasons, I think it works well for this city. And I rarely start from scratch.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I rarely just copy and paste.
I mean, I definitely would agree that. I mean, I think it's a really well written legal document. I mean, it's very lengthy and specific, as you say, but I mean that's good for a legal document as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that does mean that there maybe need to be, obviously, I would strongly encourage like a TLDR like version for like what does this actually mean, and like boil it down to like the 1-page version. But I mean that's something that can be done on the front end. So I'll just one last thought, particularly since you mentioned it, and then I'll cede my time. Or what was it? What section? It was in the. All right, it was in 150.097 section B2. The building is being actively maintained as required by Section 8, and is actively being offered for sale, lease, or rent. The reason that one jumped out at me is because, like, for example, just next to my property, I have 2 separate properties, one of which has been up for rent for 3 or 4 years and counting, and another one that has been up for sale for 3 to 4 years and counting. Which is challenging, right? I get to some point, I'm like, okay, like, and I mean, it's interesting for me as someone who's operating, say, the nonprofit like model, where it's like a place just standing vacant for 3 to 4 years would be inconceivable. Like, who on earth could possibly afford that? But clearly, these property owners can. And to me, that is kind of like, that is a concern. I guess we'll just throw that out there. Is like, what constitutes essentially like defining what actively being offered means? I mean, if a property owner is like, great, cool, like I don't actually intend to really sell this or lease this property, I'll just put it up for lease for an outrageous price that won't be borne by the market, and it'll just sit on the market indefinitely.
Yeah, I think that one of the mechanisms here to discourage people from just putting a for lease sign in their window and forgetting about it is that there's a monitoring fee regardless of whether or not you're in compliance with the code, right? So out of compliance means that neither A nor B is true. And then we're talking about the fines that are imposed at the back end, and those are really quite extraordinary fines. The fees are set by council and haven't been set yet. They will be subsequent to this. And I think my intent is to encourage the fees to be high enough that it's discouraging somebody from just saying, I'm better off putting a for sale sign or a for lease sign, even if it's unreasonable, and it's never going to lease.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I really appreciate what you just said right there, because I'm in full agreement as far as a recommendation to council that if you're going to have a monitoring fee there to encourage people to really deal with the vacancy issue, then it needs to be enough to actually be motivating.
Yeah. And I think that even somebody who has a permit and is actively, remodeling or bringing into compliance under a permit will suffer some of those same delays. And, we see that too. Somebody pulls a permit, they say they're going to get their property into compliance, and then months and months and months go by, not much is happening, right? And so the monitoring fee is regardless of whether or not you're doing one of the two things that has you not in violation of the ordinance. Vacant building period, you're going to have a fee. You don't just get to freely have one under this model if council agrees.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I can keep talking, but
You can keep talking if you have more questions. Wanted to give. Do either of the other commission members have comments or questions? I had a few, and then I'll toss it back to you, Calder. Sorry. The 15 days. Could you? I agree that that seems short. I was just wondering if you could elaborate. I'm sure that that came from somewhere. Could you
didn't.
elaborate on where that it didn't?
Not that I remember. I mean, it's possible that it came from, somebody else's model, but there's no reason for it not to be 30 days or 45. I mean, I tend to agree with you. Shortened time periods are good for some reasons, and I think 30 days is perfectly reasonable. So I would make that change based on this conversation before I bring it to council.
Commissioners, if you want to think about that as we're having this discussion, we could decide if we want to make that recommendation at the end. I was unclear on a few things, so I'm also going to get in the nitty gritty in a different way, if you don't mind, just to help me understand personally. Could you clarify under number 3, towards the beginning, how long the property owners have to submit the notice? How long the property owners have once they get their notice of vacant building to submit the plan? I wasn't clear on that.
You're in section 098 E3. Is that what we're talking about?
Okay, wait, sorry, I combined two of my questions. Okay, page 3, number 3, about the notice of vacant building. Does it negatively impact the property owner if it's been canceled or after it's been rescinded? I guess that's my first question. If just having it on their record.
Okay, so you're talking about the recordation of a notice of...
Yeah, sorry, I slightly changed my question. I had a different question for later on that I confused that with. Sorry about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a conversation with a lawyer unless you get it depends at least once, right? So if there's simply a notice that there's a violation of an ordinance, then it will impact the owner for as long as it's recorded, but not once it's rescinded. If there's a recordation of something more than simply a notice of violation that also has fees attached to it, then the owner, depending on the type of attachment, may have a more difficult time disposing of it without paying those fees first. But once the notice of removal of the vacant building violation is recorded, then there should be no further issue with that. I mean, notices on properties get recorded and rescinded all the time for all sorts of reasons, and I can't think of a situation in which somebody would look in the past at something like that and be worried about it. These are the kinds of things that show up on a preliminary title report. For example, if you were to try to sell your home, if it's recorded, then it's showing up in the prelim as a cloud. If a notice has been recorded on top of that says that notice is no longer active, then it shouldn't be showing up in the preliminary title report.
Thanks. I think that helped.
Okay.
And so, same page, between, the number 2, the step where the city determines that this building is vacant, and start communicating with the owner. Is there a timeline before this notice is initiated to give the owner time to respond? I wasn't clear on if there's a delay between putting the notice of vacant building on the property.
Typically, that's pretty discretionary on the part of the code enforcement officer. So if, for example, you have a 30-day timeline, which we've discussed as being potentially a more reasonable timeline than the 15 days, after that 30-day timeline, if there's not been compliance, then any time after that, a notice could be recorded. I will say that it's not usually right away because code enforcement officers have a lot going on. But it could be any time after that is what I would say. If 30 days is the time for you to come into compliance and you don't, a notice could be recorded on day 31.
I have a third question, and then I'll bump it back to you because, this might take a while, but I do think that it's good to drill down into these specific questions. Like, that's what we're here for. So I do want to encourage the commission members to ask questions and make comments as well. So on page 3, number 5, talking about the owner being liable for the costs incurred by the city. Is there a standardized way of determining what those costs will be, or that will be at a later date, or is that dependent upon each circumstance? Or
yeah, so there's a number of ways in which the city could assess costs against the property, and the way those are discussed later. So,
sorry.
No, that's okay. I think this is important to drill down.
Oh,
so
I see,
administrative costs and penalties, and then procedure, we're at 099. The city has a couple of options here, and just in general, those options usually include taking the costs to the council and having the council approve those costs. And if you want to have those costs assessed against the property, in other words, put on the property tax rolls for collection, there's a very specific procedure in the government code that we would follow.
Gotcha.
And I think that's spelled out more or less. I may even cite the government code, or if I don't, I could, if you think that would be helpful. In other words, be more specific about what the process is. But the government code is strict about how costs get assessed against property, and the county tax collector, for example, isn't going to put an assessment on the tax bill unless we've followed that procedure and proven to their satisfaction that we have followed that procedure.
I personally am not sure if it'd be necessary to cite the code. I think it was more clarification for my purposes, and I do think that the administrative costs and penalties probably outlines most of what people would be asking about. Thanks. That addressed my initial questions. Calder?
Yeah. Well, jumping around again. So I'm looking at the public comments that we got, not just from Nancy, but also from Raylena. Raylena's, I want to just call out that overall her comment was very positive regarding the ordinance, and that's a great sign. And I agree with her that I do believe it's a very well-written ordinance. Both these comments brought up the question of incentives. And, certainly, there's the Septet and Facade Grant program, which is a really great program that I'm going to be taking advantage of any second now, as soon as I get the staff time together to deal with these projects, which, certainly does get to something that Raylena mentioned, which is like trying to make sure that this is targeted at bad actors, people who are just letting their properties lay fallow, rather than folks who are like, yeah, I'd love to do that, but I just need a little extra help right now. Times are tight. It does make me think two things, that if we have both of these comments asking about this, that like perhaps there needs to be just, at the same time that this is getting rolled out, like also like on page 2 needs to be, and by the way, remember the SEPTED and facade grant program, just to really drive home the carrot and the stick, as it's getting rolled out to the business community. Also, just another thought there too regarding, well, for example, when Nancy, we hear in your comment, was asking where the facade grants to support enhanced security. I mean, the facade grant also does support other stuff too, certainly. But I will admit that it is kind of currently structured in a bit of an odd way, right? I mean, it's like, okay, well, here is like X amount of dollars for security improvements, and then you can get for facade improvements, you can get 25% of up to $10,000. It's not the end of the world, but it's a bit of a sort of like something you look at sometimes, and I'm like, okay, like, just sort of like, no, that's it takes a little while to wrap your head around it. I'm just wondering, without trying to either cost the city more money, certainly, or to be a real burden on staff time, would it be possible to revisit perhaps a simplification of the SEPTED program, just to make it flow a little better in terms of like make it really clear, like, okay, this is how much money a business owner would have available for these kinds of expenses, and this is how much money they would have available for these kinds of expenses, and have that roll out with this as well, just so people are really like, okay, I clearly understand what the incentives also are. Again, understanding that, like, yeah, it's all just, it's still just a concern of like how much staff time and money is available, of course. But those are my thoughts on that.
I did ask about additional funds for that kind of thing based on the comment during department head meeting this morning, and SEPTED grant funding was mentioned, but it's possible that others here know more about that than I do. And if anybody, thanks.
I'd like to jump in. So our SEPTED program, we'd actually like to bring before the commission some changes to the program, 2 changes. One, we'd like to limit the total amount of funding that one parcel is allowed. So have a max of $5,000 that one site is allowed. And I can get into the details of why we're thinking of that change. The other change is to also, currently it waives building and design review fees, and a lot of staff time goes into this, and we need to recover our costs, and so we'd like to eliminate that as well. I do think simplifying the program at the same time would be a good idea. And then we've talked about considering adding a third option. So there's the SEPTED option, there's the facade option, but then having a third option where if you have a chronic vacancy, having some sort of incentive grant to fill that vacancy. And I don't know, we've just kind of been brainstorming how to go about that. Like if you produce a lease or something, we can talk about this more down the road, but how they would demonstrate that improvement. And then as we've been dealing with vacancies and I've had conversations with property owners, what I consistently hear is their obstacle is that they are not in compliance with the building code or not in compliance with ADA requirements. And that is what is holding them back from renting their space. And so if that potential incentive could also help resolve those issues. But that is opening a can of worms. Right now, facade and SEPTED, we stand outside. We don't go inside the property. It is not a gotcha program. We specifically don't look for issues, but this would be like a shift of going inside the building.
I mean, that is you're right. That is a can of worms. I mean, that having been said, I mean, that kind of direction seems to me like potentially very fruitful, just because, I mean, like to me, like the value of an incentive system is to also like encourage good action, right? And the people who, again, if people are in a position where, and I certainly can sympathize with this deeply, if people are like, I would really love to have this building occupied, but ADA compliance or other code issues, if there are ways that the city can basically To me, it actually makes more sense to, instead of saying like, hey, as long as it's just occupied in some way, here's some extra money or whatnot. Like, I honestly prefer the approach, at least of like, okay, how can we specifically work with you and address the specific barriers that are happening, that you're experiencing, in order to get you to occupancy, as opposed to just being like, okay, here's a check as long as you have a renter by the end of the month. You know, that, as opposed to that approach.
I will just comment that while I think the SEPTED program is probably an absolutely wonderful one and I support it, I likely wouldn't recommend knitting it into the ordinance itself, because we want the ordinance to be enforceable whether or not the SEPTED program is available, I think. And so, yes, of course, the city is always going to do whatever it can to help people come into compliance for the purpose of the betterment of the community as a whole to the extent that it can. But those kinds of monies do come and go, and their implementation is, you know, it's often grant funded, it's often complicated by other economic factors. And this ordinance, I think, needs to stand on its own. That would be my recommendation to council.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with you. Just to clarify, I there was no intent, because you're right, it would be a terrible idea. I agree that like that these are not like connected at all, you know, in any kind of actual legal fashion. That this is rather that at the same time as this ordinance is being introduced to the business community, remind them that currently, as funding allows, these incentive programs do exist, and here's how you can take advantage of them. So they're not just seeing the stick, you know, they're also seeing a carrot to put in front of them.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
I really thought that these were very insightful comments, and appreciated that these two community members submitted them. My thought is we also, I would want to be careful about providing incentives or what could be like somewhat of a reward for people who've allowed their property to get to such a state. My thought, especially when we have these resources, I think it is very valuable, and we should advertise and do more outreach about sharing information about those resources. But like about creating new incentives, yeah, I'm hesitant about like rewarding this. However, saying that, I know that there are situations where people might fall into difficult financial circumstances, which may result in them not being able to upkeep their property for one reason or the other. I'm wondering if there shouldn't be some kind of language in here, or maybe you can refer me to where it is somewhere else, of if someone's in like a can show that they're in a severe financial distress, that they can get some kind of payment plan or get some kind of like way, like establish a plan with the city to handle this, some kind of relief as it relates to these penalties, or some kind of like you can get a waiver, we can establish a separate plan, or a payment plan or something like that to address that. Like, is there something like that? And if not, have we thought about that?
I think that the only measure in the ordinance itself that might be an avenue for that is the appeal process, whereby somebody requests that there be a review of those fees. But a waiver of fees based on financial hardship you know, I honestly think that it might be a better idea to address that more broadly, because we have fees all over in our, we have a fee schedule, we have ordinances that have penalties, and I wouldn't want to piecemeal a waiver program for this ordinance and not have it for other areas. So I think that if that's a broad concern of the council that fees and penalties are too high, it should be addressed broadly rather than in individual ordinances. And we see this with a kind of a lot of issues in our municipal code. For this ordinance, we have this appeal process. And it's my hope that over time we can start going towards, more streamlined. This is the appeal process overall. Here's a waiver program overall. Right now, we don't have that, but I think it's worth exploring, and that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And whether or not, I'm not saying that our fees are too high. I definitely think the city incurs a lot of costs, and it makes sense we have to cover the staff costs to maintain, a safe community. But some kind of way of helping people in difficult situations, I think, is really valuable, whether that's like working with staff to try to develop a plan and maybe like a discount on fees or some other avenue to provide some relief. I think, I mean, I don't know how often that even comes up as a problem. Maybe there's not that many people who experience that, but perhaps, Swan, if you think that that's appropriate, maybe we could touch on that in the future.
Yeah. My sense is that I don't deal with the taking money from the public personally, but my sense is that there are a lot of people experiencing hardships, and the fees are certainly not set at a level above what it costs the city to perform the services. And we're talking about fees here, not penalties. So there's two separate buckets of money coming in, and they're treated differently, as they should be treated differently. The city's not making money on fees. We're just trying to pay for the cost of providing them the services. And I think there's a lot of people that experience hardships and ask about waivers. And so, again, that's why I would say for this particular thing, let's not carve out an exception for people who have, let's face it, an additional building to the one that they live in.
Do we have data on how many of these vacant buildings? Can you hear me? There you go. Sorry. Do we have data on how many or the percentage of vacant buildings are actually out of town or out of state owners, or even out of country?
I don't know. Anybody else? No? We do have Director Kenyon in the audience, which is nice. I know that there was a study recently done. I don't know if they addressed that issue.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I'm Kristen Kenyon, Development Services Director. We, Public Works, Brian Issa looked at vacancies, and residential vacancies were easier to detect based on like water being turned off or used. And we could definitely correlate that with, we have all the property owners' addresses, home addresses, so we could figure that out. That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
I'm just curious how many of the, like you were saying, I mean, I think of it as if I can't upkeep my building, then I sell it. And if I can't sell it for the price I want, then I have to sell it for less, or, it goes to bankruptcy, or it goes, like everybody else does in this world. So I'm just curious how that works with, You know, if you have somebody who lives and resides in the community and are actively trying to do something with the building, that would be noticeable. And if they're not, then they're probably, like you said, they're having some financial difficulties. And I'd be more inclined to working out something with a person like that rather than somebody who's living out of state and doesn't really care about it and it's just sitting on it. So I don't know if that can be.
Yeah, that's been brought up in the past by another council member, the idea of limiting the ability of folks from out of state, purchasing multiple buildings. And I think there's some real, problematic legal issues with that approach. And so, the way that this ordinance is written, we're treating everybody with a vacant building the same. And I think that's the standard that we adhere to in all things, from a legal perspective. That's where I feel most comfortable, and that's what I typically recommend, in spite of the fact that, of course, from an emotional perspective, right, we're like absentee owner. But targeting folks because they don't live in the community is not something that I'm comfortable advising.
I mean, I would agree with you there. I mean, as much as I have my own, like you said, personal feelings or thoughts about, like, absentee landlords, legally, we're held to a different standard. As far as like your questions, Aubrey, I mean, I definitely feel for what you're saying regarding issues of people who are having like legitimate financial issues regarding these fees or whatnot. And at the same time too, I mean, like I don't know, I'm just hesitant because I mean, like to consider like ways in which people could reduce these fees, just because I'm afraid of giving loopholes wherein people basically again essentially make the fees a non-issue. Right. And if the fees are a non-issue, that's both like not getting the city's money losses recouped, but it's also just like, it's not. I feel like I'm afraid it's not solving the issue. I mean, I think that to get to what you're saying, though, I mean, I think again, I would just think that if there are ways in which perhaps again through this appeal process, that property owners might be able to not only bring up financial hardship, but also identify, hey, these are I want the property to be occupied. I want to sell it. I want to have it leased or whatnot. Here are the challenges that are getting in the way of that. If there are ways that we can help them get to that point, right? To me, like that's like, how can we make the city's involvement proactive in getting the outcome that the city wants, right, and that the property owners want, rather than just being like, oh, okay, well, you say you have a hardship, okay, cool, great, well then we're gonna just knock that fee down. Like that's I mean, because I think that in that case, I mean, even if it is someone who really does have financial hardship, my concern would be like, great, I mean, that's good for them, but is the property going to be rented still, like, or is it going to be sold? Because if it's just still standing vacant, then it's still the problem hasn't gone anywhere. So I would be like, okay, like how could we instead use the same amount of money the city might normally be using to reduce their fees and direct that investment into like, okay, how do we get you to the point that this property is occupied?
One of the things that I have written down here is a conversation with Director Millar to see about perhaps directing some of the funds from the fees and penalties that are collected into a separate fund that then gets redispersed rather than into the general fund writ large. And that's a conversation we can have about the logistics of that. Whether that's the will of the council, I don't know, but it's certainly something to explore. And I also want to say this is a new ordinance that I think is going to get rolled out over the next 6 months to a year, and we're going to see how it works. And we might be back in front of this commission in a year to say, you know, what have you heard from the community? Is it working? Here's some issues we've run into. What do you think? How can we modify? Because ordinances are not, well, this one took a while to draft, but they're not difficult to amend, right? You introduce, you read it a second time, it gets implemented 30 days later. It's something we do all the time. So, you know, I love the discussion that we're having, and I think we should consider that we'll have it again, you know, as these issues get kind of worked out and we see how it gets implemented. I mean, the other thing I will say is that a lot of the concerns and the questions that you raise, I'm just thinking about our code enforcement team, and I know them, and they're magnificent. And so, you know, implementation and listening to people's stories and what their issues are and trying to figure out how the city can help them. You know, I know that Matt Morgan and Chris Lyons and Brandy Jones and Troy Trujillo are all out there doing those kinds of things every single day, talking to people, making sure that we do whatever we can to help them get back into compliance with the law. That's the first step, and those folks are really, really great at it.
No, I mean, thank you for saying that. I mean, I appreciate that, like, the staff in the city of Eureka is, I mean, I have a lot of very fond things to say about all the staff. I mean, certainly all the people in this room for sure. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think that's exactly to the point I was hoping to make there, that is like, how can we make sure that through an appeal process or what have you, that the ordinance is not just a stick, and are like making sure that there is a way to curb bad actors, but that the city staff, the code enforcement staff, is as empowered as possible with the resources and tools through the ordinance, or like, again, with your conversations about potentially additional funding for other programs, to help people who want to get their property occupied, get them to that place, right? How can we also be not just punitive, but positive moving forwards?
Sure.
I'd like to add something. Our division administrated a lot of the COVID relief funding that came through the city of Eureka, and that was specifically for businesses or organizations or individuals that were facing financial hardship. And throughout administrating those funds, a lot of the burden of that, proving that financial distress, fell on our finance department's team. And it's not a really easy thing to identify it. It really takes diving into things, and it also means that the person applying for that has to have all their financial statements be organized and prepared. And so it's my gut is that a lot of folks that are going to be faced with this are going to have financial difficulty, and that is the reality of the situation. And so just to start, I think we'd be adding in a lot of work to set up that relief option.
Yeah, just again, to be clear on that, I agree with you. I mean, I think that a straight relief option would be, a lot of extra work, and not necessarily addressing the problem itself either. I feel you.
Okay, so continuing, I think I had one more comment, and then I believe we need to open it to the public. I did notice the appeal allowed for a notice of appeal to be received within 5 days from the notice of vacant building, which also seemed a tiny bit short to me. I'd like to pose it to the commission to also consider, while we listen to or open it for public comment, maybe extending that to like 15 days to at least give a little time for people to receive the notice and
I would definitely agree about that.
Yeah, send it back. And then, you'd have to also extend the hearing date to correspond to that, I would imagine. So great discussion. Do any of you want to make any other comments or have any questions before we open it to the public, and then we'll bring it back for final thoughts? Okay. So opening the topic for public comment. Did I do that right? Okay.
Make sure her little green light is on.
It's always too low. Thank you for that discussion. That was riveting. I wanted to, in addition to the comment that I had submitted previously, just based on the discussion, just point out that we do have an existing housing trust fund that was approved by council April 16th of 2024. So as Swan pointed out, there is a can of worms when you go into someone's house if you're talking about bringing it into compliance. However, there's already mechanisms in place that would not only qualify people from a financial standpoint that would not burden departments, but also has the structure to allocate funds that also pay back into the community with low interest rates. And it might just be a matter of not necessarily knitting it into the ordinance as you suggested, but posing to council that it, rather than the general fund, this would be a prime program to fund the newly established housing trust fund, which does have some seed money in it. But if there is this large negative incentive for bad actors or people who are out of compliance, to get it together, there is also the funding available to do that. And it might also support a comprehensive marketing program to educate the public on this, because again, that's something that takes away from staff time. Anecdotally, I was born in Pittsburgh. I grew up there when I was younger, and my family benefited from the low income loan program that Allegheny County passed in 1983. So in the 1990s, we took an old Victorian, I say we, I was a child, but my family added electricity and plumbing to what was kind of a dusty, abandoned, vacant Victorian, and really made it, something special. And still there today. I went back, and, looking around, whether it's a desire of will or ability, I think the majority of people are acting in good faith, but it's, become overgrown, to use a metaphor of, like your garden and the upkeep that it takes for it to really, really shine. And it's more of an ability. Demographically speaking, we do have a lot of older homeowners. And so the other aspect of bringing the community in, and maybe it's just a question of marketing about different volunteer programs that exist where we can come together and put in a little bit more effort to help our neighbors. Lastly, I did want to add that there was a very comprehensive study done with census data that actually tracked where homeowners live in relation to the properties that they own. So nationally speaking, there's about a 5% out-of-state homeownership. There's about almost 20% homeowners that live outside of their zip code. But I did share that map with Swan, and so you can take a look. It's interactive and looks at the community. So thanks for letting me go over.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, seeing nobody else, gonna close the public comment, bring it back to the commission for final thoughts.
Yeah, well, thank you for, first off, calling this meeting riveting. I think someone should just clip that and put it up on the internet somewhere. Just maybe we can get more people in here. But also, regarding the housing trust fund. I mean, yeah, I mean that's it's a great resource. But I'm curious. I mean, like at least it's my initial read, and maybe someone can correct me on this. Like at least I'll admit, like much of my own personal concern regarding vacancies are regarding commercial vacancies. Like those are the ones I see every day in the downtown, and like I just get confronted with as I'm opening my own front door. And I don't believe that those are really under the purview or scope of the housing trust fund that is focusing on affordable housing. Is this okay? I'm seeing some.
I think that's right, but I will say that the vacant building ordinance is targeted at both, and
Right,
I think
yeah,
it's very much the council's will that, to the extent possible, as we roll this out, as we think about perhaps drafting a policy or a set of policies around how this gets rolled out, incentivizing people to get their vacant houses back into the mix, right?
Yeah.
The city is looking for houses for people who need help, who, our care and uplift team is out there helping and trying to find housing for folks. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which you could, and I'm sure we will, work together as a city, as a group of departments, seeing the different ways in which, say, code enforcement might be out there using this as a stick, and also suggesting to somebody that perhaps there's a way that we can work with other departments or teams to house folks who need housing. I mean, I was inspired by the public commenters, commenting about her own experience in a building that was, underutilized. It sounded like that came back into utilization. That's really cool. That's what we want here. In my neighborhood, I see, lots of really cute houses that just, they've been vacant for too long. It's not good for houses to be vacant. And, I don't want this to just, and I don't think council wants this to just be punitive. We want to also offer people opportunities to say, move on from just being an owner of a vacant building.
No, I agree with you very much. I mean, I'm probably, speaking of opening cans of worms and probably jamming my thumb on a hot button issue here, but would there be conceivably, and again, this is sort of very blue sky visioning, ways in which the Eureka Housing Trust Fund could interface with folks enforcing this new code to talk to commercial property owners about, hey, have you considered maybe turning this into affordable housing? Because we might be able to provide support for that.
I don't know.
So,
Certainly something I can, it's an inspiring thought, and I'm happy to look into it, but I don't know enough about the Housing Trust Fund to know whether or not there's interplay
Would
there.
that have to deal with rezoning, though, if it's commercially zoned? How would that?
Right, that's my thought. It could be quite complicated.
Yeah, and perhaps, although I'm happy to hear what Director Kenyon has to say, it may be a little beyond the scope of the conversation. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, first of all, our commercial zones, housing's principally permitted in all of our commercial zones. So they're all actually mixed use zones. And then we do have an implementation program in our housing element about looking at red tag properties and figuring out how to get them developed with housing. I approached code enforcement about that, and they were a little weary of it because they want to separate those two things so it doesn't appear that we are, going after people and red tagging them for the purpose of redevelopment. So it's a little bit tricky legally.
Yeah, I thank you for that. And that was great information. Also, I could definitely see how that would be, like I said, hot button issue it already is. Definitely, I could see the headlines already on that. the editorials.
Red tag buildings are not buildings that people can live in either.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's the bigger issue.
Well,
with-
yeah, I mean, there's
in
there's a
my
lot of
mind.
there's a lot of different narratives around this issue in Eureka right now. Obviously, I mean, I think that, I guess to me, like, again, this is very blue sky, far flung future beyond the scope of this conversation. But I just do think, like, being able to open up those conversations in a proactive, like, again, not red tagging, not being like, oh, look, now you're part of redevelopment, but like having those proactive conversations with property owners, be like, hey, like, there are other options for the use of this property, and we may be able to support that if you decide to, as a property owner, make that choice, right? To encourage it rather than vice versa. I don't know. Can we have second breakfast on public comment? It's like.
I'm gonna defer to Swan and Jessica. What do you guys? Can we reopen it for public comment since we're a commission? We can be a little more casual. Come back up, please. Share your thoughts.
Thank you for that. Calder, I just wanted to, maybe it's just a point of order about the Eureka Housing Trust Fund, but it does include all income brackets other than above moderate income. So I know that affordable housing can be a hot button issue, but I think it's important to stress that this is a very inclusive program and essentially incorporates every type of housing that Eureka would need other than the ultra luxury. So I think it stands to reason that I don't know. It made me like point of just one thing to point out. That's it. Thank you.
No, I am in total agreement, and there's probably a number of people that I would love to recommend you talk to regarding definition of affordable housing. And yeah, I mean, I think that's why, like, I almost hesitate to bring it up, because I know there's a lot of like emotional gut reactions to the term affordable housing, which are not really, I mean, if I'm going to be completely honest and forefront, like not really grounded in the reality of what affordable housing actually is, which is housing for, well, for example, me. Like, I'm in the income bracket that affordable housing would be targeted at. So yeah, I mean, and also, I don't know, like, I just I'll just take a second to say, like, just personally, I feel I'm very glad that this is happening and this process is moving forward, and my great deal of thankfulness to everyone working on staff, because just emotionally, I recognize it is very hard for me to go into work every day and see people sleeping under my marquee next to a building that has been vacant for 4 years. That yeah, I have a lot of problems with that. All right, that's all I got.
Any other comments? I will close again for public comment. I don't know if that matters, but just in case, I do want to echo Commissioner Johnson, who didn't call you by your first name this time, his sentiments about this ordinance. It is impressive and great to see movement on, I think an issue that we're all concerned about in the city of Eureka. I think that we all are impacted by. So I'm really hopeful that this will make a difference. And I do think that it looks like it'll work well. I also want to thank Swan and the economic development team for bringing this to us to review and provide our feedback on. I do think our commission cares a lot about housing and also businesses and business issues in general. So this was really great to look through. With that, I'm going to make a recommendation that we, as the commission, recommend this ordinance to the council with 2 changes, if that's appropriate. The first change was the one we discussed with regard to extending the days that people have to the 15-day timeline. Oh, the 15-day notice to 30 days. I cannot find where that was in the ordinance. I apologize.
I have made a note of it.
Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.
And then also extending the appeal timeline to 15 days instead of 5 days for the initial letter requesting an appeal, and then 30 days instead of 15 days for the hearing for the appeal. Does anyone want to second that?
I was just curious if the change from 5 to 15, do you go in blocks of days, or would you do a 2-week, just a nitpicky thing, sort of curious? Do you say, would you?
I
would you
mean,
say
if 2
from-
weeks makes more sense, we can
I
do
didn't
2.
know if it was
adding-
I don't know what your structures of the, what your blocks are, if it matters. I was just curious.
I will say that we never use weeks.
Oh, great.
Always
Thank you. That was
days.
my answer. Thank you.
Yeah. And often it will say calendar or business days, and I'm seeing that it doesn't say that here. So I would say this is intended to be calendar days, and if 15 calendar days works, I would
Thank you.
make
That
that
makes sense.
recommendation. And that's essentially 2 weeks, but 2 weeks would be unusual
I was just
versus
curious.
15 calendar days.
So specifying calendar days. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's all great. I know, and I know also you had made a note of this too, but I might throw in there, if it's amenable to the other commissioners, a recommendation that the monitoring fees, which have yet to be established, I'm trying to think of the correct language here for the recommendation, be set at a level that is sufficiently motivational, and that also fully recoups city costs.
Can we just lump that all together, or does Commissioner Johnson need to reiterate what I said as well? Oh, I do? Okay. I would also like to incorporate what Commissioner Johnson said, recommending to council that as they determine the fees, that it be sufficiently motivating. What was the second part of what you said?
And fully recoups city expenses.
Yeah, and fully
Yeah.
recoups the city costs as well, as specified in the ordinance, just supporting that.
Can
So-
I point out that the ordinance as written does say that the monitoring fee will recover the city's regulatory costs, and also say that as a general rule, cities are not allowed to do more than that
Okay.
with fees. They can do it with penalties, but they can't do it with fees.
Okay. Well, that's okay. Well, then we should scratch that from the language. And
But
Yeah.
recouping monitoring costs is already in here.
yeah, okay, then
Yeah.
that's included as part of the regulatory. Okay, then, good. Then that takes care of that concern. Then yeah, gosh, I just hope that those fees are sufficient, that people don't just write them off.
I will
as
say
a
the
business
penalties
expense.
are pretty serious. I mean, $1,000 a month is
Oh
I
no,
think
no. I mean,
quite
and
a
I'd
bit,
agree.
and
The penalties are quite severe. But again, I think that's kind of cycle back to the earlier conversation that as written, it's very easy for someone to technically be in compliance, even if they're just like, hey, yeah, I'll rent this place for $1 million a month. It's on the market. I don't know what else you want me to do. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then we should increase their taxes if they
Yeah.
do that.
I think that there may be, based on this conversation, I will look into whether or not there's a way to define actively seeking to sell or lease in so as to give direction to code enforcement that if somebody is not being sincere In other words, if they've set the cost way above market rate such that rental is impossible and can be shown by the lack of rental for many years, I think there may be a way for me to do that, and I think it's a good idea if that's the recommendation.
If there was a way to include language, for like things like fair market value, like ways to like how many offers are you getting? I mean, like, are you actually getting active offers on the property, and are you considering them? Like ways of determining that, right? Because if they're also just not accepting offers, then that's another indication that they're not really serious about.
Yeah, I mean, there's some tenets about ordinance writing that say keep it, don't definition your way into a rabbit hole into the weeds, right? And actively, I think, is a word that has legal meaning. And so I'm not suggesting that I will. I want to think about prior to sending to council if there's a way to define actively that helps us address this issue of folks just, and I certainly know what you're talking about. I've seen it not just here, but in other cities where I have worked. That building's been for rent for years. How could you possibly be sincerely trying to rent it? That's just not how rentals work. So I understand the concern, and I will endeavor to address it.
I appreciate that very much. And I mean, and as you said earlier too, I mean, like, it is very possible to amend this later, which actually I know we're so close to a motion there, but is there a plan actively in place for assessing this ordinance at, like, say, the 6-month mark, the 1 year mark? Like, has there been thought put into it yet in terms of like how the performance of the ordinance is going to be assessed in the future?
No.
Cool. Well, we can talk about that next time.
Perhaps we could, as a commission, request this, to return to this item at a later date, like in a year, like you suggested, and we can ask some investigative questions of our own.
I will say I've been searching for vacancy rate data, a source for vacancy rate data for a while now, and it's a really hard thing to come by. It's something that you can get, like, you can put a lot of energy into getting like a moment in time, but to have like constant vacancy rate data, I've been unable to find a source for that. And so I think that would be the good measurement of how effective this is. And I'm concerned that we would put our energy into tracking that data and not actually doing the work of the ordinance. And so that's been my hesitation on like the measurements of this.
It seems like the way to track it or to see if there's been an impact would be to see if there's been notices of vacancies that have been, put onto titles and then removed. I would think the count of the removed vacancies might be a way, but that might take time again. So perhaps we could circle back to that and discuss different ways. So let me try again here with what we're trying to recommend. So it sounds like 3 parts. We'd like to recommend as a commission for the council to pass this ordinance with adjustments to the 15-day limit on the notice, the 5-day and 15-day timeline on the appeal, and then was that it? Did we address the third thing for a later time? Okay, so just the 2 things. Thank you.
Something for the future. Yeah.
Trying to condense all of the conversation. Okay, so just the 2 things. Would somebody like to make a second that?
I will second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay. Motion passed. Motion carries. Thank you for your time. This has been great.
Thank you for your guys' time. It's been a real pleasure.
Swan, I do see we have obviously we've spoken to you, the Development Services Director, Kristen Kenyon. Do we want to jump to that item to respect her time?
That's next on our agenda, the local coastal program amendment under reports and communications.
Of course.
Which will
Top
probably
of the
be
list.
lengthy
Sorry about that.
if City Attorney Luna wants to leave, because unless you're super pumped.
You know,
This is riveting.
I'm pretty pumped. I wouldn't mind staying. Do you want to take my seat though, and I'll go out into the audience? Okay.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. Swan asked me, your official title, Economic Development Manager, to give an update on the local coastal program update. So our city is, part of our city's in the coastal zone, which this map shows. The boundaries of the coastal zone were established by the state, and the Coastal Act is an added regulatory layer there that requires all development in the coastal zone to get a coastal development permit in addition to other permits. And the Coastal Commission, the state agency that oversees the Coastal Act, they delegate this permitting authority to local governments that have a local coastal program that's certified by the Coastal Commission. And then cities that have a certified LCP like Eureka, we get to approve coastal development permits in our jurisdiction if the proposed development is consistent with our certified local coastal program. And what a local coastal program is it's the Coastal Act related portions of our general plan and our zoning code. So it's this chapter in our land use, in our general plan that we call the coastal element, because chapters of our general plan are called elements for some reason. And that general plans have broad policies that are kind of like our guiding policies for everything we do in the city. And then we have an inland code and we have a coastal code. So we have two separate codes in the city for zoning. And changes to anything that's in the local coastal program requires certification by the Coastal Commission, and they only certify it if they feel like it conforms with and is adequate to carry out the Coastal Act. So the city comprehensively updated our general plan in 2018. It's called the 2040 General Plan because it had a 20-year planning horizon. And it's really not effective in the coastal zone until our local coastal program gets updated. Also, we comprehensively updated our inland code in 2019. And we really want to update our coastal code to include the relevant portions of the 2040 General Plan and the inland zoning code. And it's going to be different though, because we're going to have to make some edits and additions to make sure it's consistent with the Coastal Act and includes everything the Coastal Commission wants it to include. Basically our zoning and land use designations have to be by definition certified by the Coastal Commission in the coastal zone. And what decisions we make on what uses are allowed where has to do what the Coastal Commission will allow. They're looking at, is it protective of coastal resources? They care about biological resources, visual, cultural, water quality, public access, and recreation. Does it ensure adequate services? There's actually really great, even though the Coastal Act was written in the 70s, there's lots of great policies about promoting infill development over sprawl, minimizing risks to hazards, and not displacing uses that are priority uses under the Coastal Act, which includes visitor serving commercial, especially lower cost visitor serving commercial accommodations, and coastal dependent industry and agriculture. That's why those properties are often cheaper, because they don't, that are zoned for those priority uses, because often those zoning districts don't allow anything else in them. So Eureka's LCP was originally certified by the Coastal Commission in 1984. Our LUP, the general plan policies part of it, got updated in 1997 when we did our last general plan update, but the zoning regulations never got updated. So they're really outdated. They're based on this 1960s suburban sprawl framework. For instance, all this small parking is required by our LCP. They're actually less environmentally protective than our inland code. Like, our inland code has great dark sky compliant lighting standards and landscaping standards that our coastal code doesn't have. And it makes adaptive reuse of existing buildings infeasible a lot of the time. This is part of our vacancy issue. People call, they want to reuse a building on, 3rd Street. It's actually more than that, because it's anything, like anything east of Myrtle Avenue is in the coastal zone. So there's commercial properties on 4th and 5th there that people might want to turn into a residence. But to turn it into a residence, you need additional parking and yard area. And if you have an existing structure on the site that covers the entire site, you can't do those things, and you need a variance, and it's just a headache. So we definitely want to remove all these barriers to productive infill development and adaptive reuse with the LCP update. Other things that we really want to do is we only want to cover Coastal Act topics of concern. The Coastal Commission doesn't care about economic development, and so we don't want to put economic development policies into our certified LCP, because anybody can, appeal a coastal development permit to the Coastal Commission that we approve based on any policy in our LCP. So we don't want to put more in there than what what needs to be in there, because then we're basically giving up control. We want to limit it to key distinct policies and regulations. People always like to add lots and lots of policies, but we have to analyze every development that comes in for consistency with our LCP. So when you add like 7 findings of approval for a design review, we have to analyze each individual one of those, and it really slows down and makes permitting way more expensive. So it's important to be concise. And then we also want to avoid Coastal Commission modifications. They can either approve our LCP update as submitted, or they can deny it. And in denying it, they can suggest modifications that, if are adopted verbatim by the city, they will then say that it's adequate and certify it. So they basically, there's not back and forth. Like, they've denied it, and the only way to get it approved is to accept all their modifications verbatim. So we want to avoid that. So we want to include enough information to achieve certification, but not more than that is necessary. So for instance, because they care about water quality, they want to see a requirement for construction phase best management practices in the LCP. And that's really frustrating to cities, because they have a whole nother requirement from the Regional Water Quality Control Board to do the same thing. And so they're like, I don't want to put that in my LCP. That's already in this other place. And they don't do it at all. And then the commission suggests 10 pages of regulations to add. That's really not, we want this really concise, plain English language, and that's not what they put in the suggested mods. So we want to add the construction phase BMPs, but we want to do it in a way that's concise and not 10 pages long, so that we don't get that modification. So I wanted to talk today about some key changes that our LCP update we're working on. One is our old code. This is how old codes used to have, for every district, there's a list of allowable uses. And in older codes, they're really specific. And the problem with this is that it's incomplete and limiting, and it becomes dated real fast. We have just really somebody comes in for, axe throwing or a smash room, and we're like, I don't know what use that falls under, and so versus our inland code, we have like one use type that covers pretty much all this stuff, which is general retail, indoor, small. Like we have retail, indoor, outdoor, and then like small, medium, large, and that's it. And so that's a better way of doing use types under your code. Also, right now, the commercial Bayfront and the Old Town District are zoned the same, and they're principally permit just visitor serving uses and coastal dependent and related uses. So we're going to have a separate Old Town District. And then right now, any residential use or office use in Old Town needs a conditional use permit, which is really expensive because every conditional use permit triggers a coastal development permit, and it's thousands of dollars. So one change is that we're going to allow residents and offices on upper floors without conditional use permits, which seems like a no-brainer. Also allowing them on the not street-facing portion of buildings in Old Town without a conditional use permit, because really it's just the storefronts that we want to promote as visitor serving. No visitor serving use wants to be in the back of a building. Also, instead of it being so focused on tourist-oriented use types being the only ones allowed, we're going to instead limit ground floor street-facing uses based on performance standards, that they be active so that they meet certain criteria, like having activity or displays in their windows so that there's visual interest there. So like people are dining or there's a cool artwork or something. And another big thing we're doing is we're trying to rezone some of our land that's zoned only for coastal dependent industrial uses. There's just hundreds of acres of land that's vacant and unutilized around Humboldt Bay because it's zoned only for coastal dependent industry. And a market study was done in 2018, I believe. And it was like, even with counting for wind energy, we'll still have over 400 acres of additional surplus CDI land that we don't need. Also, a lot of the CDI land, CDI is coastal dependent industrial. Sorry for using an acronym. A lot of it in Eureka is actually like recreational land now that the city owns. So we're proposing to rezone a lot of it to different things like natural resource, bayfront recreation, some of it to commercial uses, and then also expanding what's allowed in the coastal dependent industrial district. So right now it's just coastal dependent industry and coastal related industry. And so we're going to be trying to also add other kinds of coastal dependent uses that are not industrial in nature, like that are civic or commercial or recreational in nature, like a Coast Guard station or marine research or a maritime museum. And also the county, they have an interim use ordinance that allows, in very limited circumstances, non-coastal dependent industry on CDI land and in a temporary basis. So we'd be considering adding those provisions to also potentially asking for office or residential above, although that's controversial because of the concern that it'll drive up land values and create an issue of nuisance where people don't want the CDI anymore. Another big thing to think about with the LCP update is sea level rise. The Coastal Act has a policy to minimize risk to flood, geologic, and fire hazards And so the Coastal Commission looks at where we're upzoning relative to hazards and discourages intensification in hazardous areas. And unfortunately, most of our coastal zone is super low lying, often previously was part of the bay. And so looking at 2040, there's a projection of around a foot of sea level rise by 2040. And there are certain areas of the city, Brainerd, Jacobs Avenue, West Side Industrial Area. Jacobs Avenue is the most vulnerable place. And so looking at what uses are potentially appropriate for that. Like right now, we allow residential uses out there. I would propose to not allow that anymore and have the ones that do exist out there be legally non-conforming and not get more out there. And then the upside is that there are some areas of our coastal zone that are going to be safe through 2100, even with 7 feet of sea level rise. They project from 1.3 to 7.3 feet of sea level rise by 2100. The OPC does, the Ocean Protection Council. East side of Old Town, the Library District, the Bridge District, and West Side, like this whole area, and then this Myrtle Avenue area too. Those are all going to be safe forever. So we should look at intensifying development there. Our current general plan says Library District should be a quiet district, but it's a good place to develop more in because it is safe and quite elevated. So that's something to think about too. And then one thing I wanted your feedback on is the draft plan talks about view corridors and maintaining view corridors to the bay, which I know is important to people. I've heard a lot of people who want, when the CDF property that the city owns redevelops, they want to maintain view corridors through there, down the streets, for pedestrians. So like at eye level, maybe through a corridor, you could even have like a second floor above it, but see through it. The map also shows it over here. This property's, well, now there's a parking lot on the left side of it, but it's undeveloped too. It's privately owned. So I guess the question is, I know the view corridors add value for everybody to have more visual access to the bay. I don't know if, but it's also like, it's harder to redevelop. It puts a constraint on redevelopment. So that's a question for you all, or if there's other places that we want to consider view corridors in the future, like if the mall ever gets redeveloped, whether we'd want a policy for them to add view corridors at that time. That's it.
Thank you. That's really awesome. No, I'm really impressed, and it's also really nice to see it's all following the footsteps of the inland rezoning and like the code redevelopment, because that's great, wonderful. Thumbs up. I'm totally lukewarm on the concept of view corridors, so I don't know, man. Like, I'd be like, great if it's one part of it. I think I'm probably gonna cycle back to like a lot of my perspectives that were in the previous topic, which is like, I just want to see like this put to use, right? Like, view corridors are great in concept. I think it's wonderful, but like if those are going to create significant barriers to redevelopment in those areas, I mean, we have huge swaths of that area that have stood open for a very, very long time. And I mean, if something's going to happen with them, if we're talking about like parks, wetlands, or redevelopment, housing, commercial, what have you, but something could go there.
I would like to poll the other commissioners as well. Put you on the spot. What do you think about the view corridors?
I mean, I think views are great, but I think there's a lot of places we can have great views in this entire county. So for me, I'd much rather see more waterfront dining and retail and places that people like. I mean, Second Street is great. We have a lot of tourists that love all the shops and the restaurants, but you know, I can't tell you how many times I just want to, besides the rooftop bar, I just want to sit outside and have a beer or, you know, some oysters or something. And I feel like that could be a huge draw because our late summer into fall is such a beautiful time of year. And that's when a lot of tourists are coming through. And to me, what better way to enjoy the marina than sitting outside? And right now we have literally the marina restaurant, what's it called, over on Woodley Island, where you can sit outside and look over at the boats and the water. And I feel like that's something that we need more of. We need to draw more people down to the marina and enjoy it, because ice cream shops, we have one, but like little things like that, you know.
I also would love more outdoor dining. And so I'm trying to as we update the code, look for ways to maybe incentivize that, like not count it towards the total square footage, or we are exploring like Wooner style streets down there where we've closed temporarily, where it's like the foot of F Street where the ice cream store is, where it's all one level, so that pedestrians feel comfortable like walking anywhere on it, but then cars are also allowed. That might free up space too, because it's also that there isn't space for outdoor dining like in the sidewalk areas, and street parking is so important to businesses. I agree. I want to see more outdoor dining, and I want to figure out like how we get that. How do we incentivize that?
I lean more toward, you throw out a blanket, take a sandwich, you see the Thursday night music events where it's just packed with people really being able to walk around and not dealing with cars and buildings. But I lean toward, pave paradise, put up a parking lot. That's what ran through my head when I heard, well, views, So I'm leaning the other way, kind of. That's my take on that.
I mean, I think also getting to like what was we mentioned here too. I mean, walkability is so nice. I know we keep cycling back around to the parking question, but it just. I mean, just what you're saying. I mean, having a lovely district that is like walkable. You have your outdoor dining, like I mean, to prioritize like spaces for people to do outdoor dining, to be able to actually just walk around an area, as opposed to like, wow, I would really love to have outdoor dining here, but like instead we decided to have 6 cars parked here. Like I think that's. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think that those are my 2 cents anyway. I know that people have very strong feelings about parking, and particularly many of the business owners. I mean, I run into those questions myself too, as a person who has a forward-facing customer serving organization, and I'm just going to say it's the same thing I've said a lot of times. I think that our parking problem is not as much of a problem as it's often made out to be. And that prioritizing more walkability in the city is the direction that I think the future lies.
I think like preserving and continuing to expand our trails and like waterfront parks really is the way for us to take advantage of the beautiful views in Eureka. Myself personally, I don't care that much about views down the streets. If we're able to, have dense development so that our old town, our downtown can be lively, I think that that's most valuable, and then people can go to the boardwalk and the parks to really enjoy the scenery. I think, maybe any kind of deterrent for using waterfront property for parking would be my preference. It does seem like a little bit of a waste of space. I know that it's, once again, like, of course, it's necessary for businesses. And we have the various requirements for different building uses. But if we're talking about like the coastal zone, parking just seems really low priority for that. So I guess, can you refresh my memory on like how parking is addressed in this amendment?
Yeah, our current LCP, actually our 97 general plan, says only allow parking. It says make sure there's adequate parking for coastal access, but only place parking between the first road and the waterfront when there's no other feasible location or something like that. So we can use that language again in our update, or just I don't know. Yeah, something like that. And then in terms of right now, our coastal code requires a ton of parking, and our inland code is much less. And there's 15 reductions, like having additional bike parking, sharing parking with compatible use. Residents need parking at night and businesses need parking during the day. And there's all these ways to, and then there's all these exemptions too. And so we really want to put all those into our coastal code, because especially in the Old Town area, it's more of a district-wide effort than it shouldn't be imposed on individual property owners, because we want to maintain that pre-car vibe of having buildings right up against each other so that you can walk and your journey is really enjoyable, versus the Broadway model where each development has to provide a ton of parking and then it's not fun to walk by it. Also, our inland code requires parking if you are going to put it in the back, which is really changing how commercial development's occurring when it does occur in our inland zone, which is really cool. It's a huge difference to walk by a building front and then a sea of parking. It's much more comfortable.
No, I was going to reiterate what you were saying. I actually do really love the idea of having more park land on the waterfront as well. I, over 10 years ago, lived in Buffalo, New York, and they're still dealing with a lot of waterfront development because of the old mills and everything there, because it was so industrial. And now it's incredible, the parks that are right on the water, and they have, barbecue pits, and you see whole families out there on the weekends having barbecues, throwing frisbee, flying kites and doing such. And there's also little small, dining spaces for the people who don't want to do that and go get fish and chips or whatever it is. So I think a nice mix of that, and providing a beautiful space for cars to park versus people to enjoy the view seems kind of silly. And so, wasn't there a talk at some point of doing like a parking garage?
Yeah, there's a feasibility study occurring for the parking garage with Humboldt Transit Authority and HCOG. And also there's talk about a shuttle so that like the two parking lots across from the Adorney Center are completely unused unless there's a big event over there. And so people hopefully would be more comfortable parking further away if there was a regular shuttle that was traversing the area.
Yeah. And I gotta say there too, part of it is just looking at potentially a cultural shift. I do feel like I mean, just to say, I mean, like the idea. I mean, my concern about the parking garages are very expensive. I mean, just we'll see what the feasibility study comes back with. But also even beyond that too. I mean, like the cultural shift of things. Sometimes I don't know. I talk to people like, you know, for example, like certainly I think like having ADA parking, very important. That's very relevant. But in other instances, I mean, I'll talk to people and they'll be like, I couldn't park directly in front of the business, and this was a war crime, right? Like I mean, I know I'm being facetious, but I mean, sometimes it feels like this is how fired up people get about it. And I mean, I just contrast this with like just coming back from Europe recently and being in these incredibly walkable cities where, again, the culture is different. It's assumed that like 90% of the time you're leaving the car at home if you leave in the area, or if you are driving somewhere, you're going to park somewhere and then you're going to walk. Maybe you'll walk 5 minutes and that's okay. You know, it's like, so, I mean, I don't know. I just feel like, I mean, it's at some point, this is what you're saying, like, I feel like we do need to make a choice between the cars or the people, right? Like, and I know which side I'm on.
For people who have consultants who have looked at our inland code, they think it's very smart because it actually has so many exemptions and reductions, but it still has parking requirements, so it keeps people comfortable. But there are a lot of jurisdictions that are going to say, hey, let the market decide on parking and don't have any parking requirements. Let the people who are building the development decide how much parking they need, and the market will figure it out themselves. And council hasn't yet given that direction, but that is somewhere that a lot of places are going these days. A lot.
What about more bike rental, like Arcata has?
I know, wouldn't that be great?
I mean, I do notice, because I take H Street home a lot, and I do notice I'm noticing more bikes on H Street and I Street,
Yes.
which is really awesome. And I don't know if it's because if you build it, they will come or what. But I feel like if we're really focusing on, you know, reducing the amount of, we're not focusing on reducing parking. We're focusing on where we can park. But, you know, we need to also provide other avenues of people to get around if they do get to Old Town or wherever in the city.
Yeah, the scooter thing didn't work out
Yeah.
for specific reasons that I don't like. A bike thing might work, so I don't know if we can bring it up at management team and see. If
Yeah, I'm
there's
just
any
curious
movement on
how Arcata, if anyone has any information on that, how well that's worked for them or not, you know, I don't know.
We do have 2 bicycles at the visitor center for rent. But yeah, the company that did provide the scooters went bankrupt and closed nationwide. So that wasn't a Eureka specific situation, but I agree having more bikes accessible would be great for everyone.
Sounds like we're all done with comments and questions.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And do we need to open it up for public comment, or because it's a report we don't have to? Can you refresh? Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks for sticking around too. Oh, did you raise your hand? Oh, please. We'll open it up for public comment.
Again, riveting, and I don't mean that facetiously. I wanted to offer a little bit of perspective on view sheds. In the district that Director Kenyon pointed out, the space in between the view sheds is a whole city block, so it is quite large. And maintaining the view sheds does prevent any development or potential development from really large massing like we would see at the mall. So let's say if the whole parcel were to be developed, then you discourage one big clump of building, and then instead you can develop it in a way that would maintain natural pedestrian corridors, walkways. And I know for people who celebrated the 4th of July, if you were on C Street, even all the way down by Henderson Center, you had a view of the fireworks in the bay, which is nice. And you can't achieve that even if you have something that has a transparency windows. You'll have glare. There's maintenance. So even though it is a restriction, I think in some ways we can find freedom in restrictions in that regard. Another, just anecdotally speaking, so I grew up in my adolescence and younger years in Denver, Colorado. And in Colorado, we have not one, but two pedestrian malls. We've got the 16th Street Mall and the Pearl Street Mall in Boulder. And both are great examples of taking a singular street, closing it down to any car use except for one public bus that more or less functions as a shuttle. At the 16th Street Mall, actually even in Pearl Street, I think there's either 2 to 4 different buses that run on a loop continuously to transport people who don't want to walk the full way, and then have kind of larger drop-off pickup points at more of a parking lot or transit center, mini transit center type thing. So in my personal opinion, I think 2nd Street as what we could say a core commercial visitor serving district would be a prime candidate to completely shut down any traffic use. You still have the alleyways on either side for deliveries. And so maybe there could be some modifications there. I work in Old Town, and at my office, I think the largest issue is a place for Otto, the FedEx driver, to park while he's delivering packages. So that could be solved fairly easily. But then again, in restrictions, there's a lot of freedom. No one's going to complain about having nowhere to park if no one can even park in the first place. And, the argument maybe from G to C as pedestrian only could be posed as sort of a pilot program for economic development. And then, my goodness, you'd have so many patio potential restaurants. I think that kind of covers my thoughts on it. Thank you for letting me share, and have a good night.
Thank you for your comment. Appreciate your enthusiasm. Okay, gonna close the item for public comment, bringing it back to the commission. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Thank you for your time. Okay, jumping. Also, good luck on getting that passed by the Coastal Commission. Okay, jumping on to the next item on our agenda, 2023 Business of the Year.
So from your list of businesses of the month, the mayor chose the Spa Personal Choice as the business of the year. And last night they were recognized at City Council, and we have a short video that we made that I'd like to share with the commission. And then a press release will be going out tomorrow, recognizing the artist and business of the year. So we will share that video now.
So sometimes we kind of wonder what inspires us and keeps us going on. I've always thought that fear, number one, is a great motivator, because if anybody has never had the opportunity to be a business owner, and you get up one morning and you look and you got payroll and you've got to make sure that you've got enough payroll money and payroll tax, I think sometimes we get lazy when things get easy, but it really takes that motivation and that commitment. I'm Susan Sanchi, the owner of the Spot Personal Choice, celebrating our 42nd year in business. Actually here in the Vance Hotel in Eureka, we're at 22 years. I love the fact that I'm in business here in Humboldt County and Eureka. My grandchildren are 6th generation to live in Humboldt, and I really feel the commitment to create a long-term thriving business, which is what we've done right here in Humboldt, so that kids can come back. In fact, I was just talking to the gals here that we are so excited. We've got some boomerang employees right now. People kind of come and go, they go away, they explore, and then they bring back their energy from another community, but they really feel at home here in Eureka. And I can't believe that we're in our 22nd year. You know, I was reading a quote that Disney said the other day, and he said, curiosity. Curiosity gives you the opportunity to open door after door after door. And I really feel that that has been our journey here at the Spot Personal Choice. We've started off with learning how to do basic skincare treatments and basic hair. And because of my inspired willingness and really drive and desire to continually learn, which has actually been our success, I get really excited about the opportunity of going 2 and 3 times a year and to see what's new and what can we bring back to our team and to our company. Inspired learning, innovation, and learning to pivot through all times of changes is really what I can say is definitely the success of the continued growth of our company. To be an inspired learner and to keep yourself involved in education and keep growing. That old saying, it's just like you're green and grow and you're ripe and you rot. So just learning and being inspired. And I think sometimes we don't think that we really have enough to give back. And I love giving back to our community. And every time I find a challenge or a problem, that's one of the things that has actually driven me. Being a 3-time cancer survivor, one of the things that I realized early on, in fact, when it was, the first time was 1987. And when I just had moved in here in 2003, I thought, oh my gosh, Lord, not now. But what I realized is I was a busy, hardworking female that had actually put my health care on the back burner. So I decided the best way for me to get through the journey was to make sure that I took my learning and my wrongdoings of not taking care of myself and making sure that other women didn't do the same thing. So I've loved the opportunity of being involved with St. Joe and Providence and lots of our cancer groups, Cancer Crushers, Humboldt Healthcare, Breast Care Project. We are so fortunate to have these things. And all of the projects that go on in those areas are just like people like me that think they have an idea and they think, well, I don't think that I can do that, but you can. And that was the thing that we love when we did Night of Courage and we've done Health Advocacy Project. But if you take what's the problem, how can I fix it, and what can I do to bring other people along, and by using the collaboration of energy in our great minds, we can have more greatness. So if you've got an idea and a spark out there, don't let it die. Make sure that you grab some people, collaborate, and just see and follow it through.
I just want to say that, I mean, like, and also just seeing, well, at least part of the the artist's video, I mean, these are really great videos. I mean, they're really professionally put together. They're very smooth, and I mean, they're very inspirational. And I mean, like, I personally just am like, kudos, and would like love to see more of this happening. I could even see, like, not even just a really nice thing to do for the artist or business of the year, but like keep making this, like, really situate these folks in Eureka and like show them as part of Eureka. And I mean, I think that's like, it's great. Honestly, it's not only great advertisement and boosting for them, it's great boosting for the city too. I mean, it's like to look at hey, these are the kinds of amazing businesses and artists and people who live and work here. I mean, I could see like smaller reels like that just showing up at the visitors center, like, or things like that, you know. So I mean, just really great job. Really love it.
Thank you. Let me respond to that when we get to Economic Development Division changes. So I'm going to keep moving along on the reports, if that's okay, Aubrey.
I had a quick question too. Maybe this will be addressed in the Economic Development Division changes. I did notice that we're not doing Business of the Month. So is that officially off?
It's not.
Okay.
I forgot, honestly. So we will bring that back.
Okay, because we had discussed potentially not doing it anymore. So I don't know.
I would like to bring back making changes to it and having a discussion about what those changes should be, and then coming back with some options for you all to vote on. I'd like us to have a special meeting in September because I'd like us to talk about changing our LCP amendment, or our SEPTED program that we talked about earlier. And then we're close on our ADU financing RFQ for designers and contractors. So that needs to come before the commission. And then we could also talk about that at the same time.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, let's move on. Graffiti.
So last year, the Eureka Lodging Alliance approached the city. They were frustrated with the amount of graffiti along the corridor. And they were talking with our code enforcement team, and code enforcement, they worked out an arrangement where the ELA would fund us $50,000 a year to help fund somebody to remove graffiti. And so what we did is we did like a pilot contract with somebody, Ben the Mural Man, Ben Goulard, and he and his team for the past year every day have been driving the corridor and addressing graffiti on the corridor within 24 hours. And they have removed 699 pieces of graffiti. And when they remove it, they color match it. So like Mike's Drive-In, you've seen it be repainted multiple times after it was graffitied. When they're removing it, they are also using our code enforcement software to document the graffiti so that if the taggers are caught, it'll be aiding in prosecution. So we've definitely noticed a decrease in graffiti along the corridor since doing this program. We're working with the ELA to see if we want to continue doing this, but for a pilot program, it's gone really well, and I just wanted the commission to know about that. I was recently given the opportunity to go to a conference in Washington, D.C. with Scott Adair, the Economic Development Director for the county. It's a conference called Select USA, and it's put on by the U.S. Department of Commerce to try to encourage international businesses to set up to start businesses in the U.S. And we were part of the California delegation, and we were the only group that was there north of Sacramento. So it felt like a really big deal to be there. It was really productive. We met with a lot of groups. And then there was a spin-off event of that the county hosted. It was the Renewable Energy Conference that they hosted called Power CA. And Eureka hosted the excursion for that. We had people come to Eureka, and they had a number of options. They could go to the Skywalk. They could go to, we had a walking tour at the visitor center talking about developing in Eureka and talking about our waterfront and the opportunities that will be available soon. Nancy Olson from the chamber hosted conversations about our business community at Dick Taylor Chocolates. And then our city manager and Supervisor Wilson and Leroy Zerling hosted a narrated tour on the Matticat. And so that was a really fun event. And we've had a number of conversations with groups after that are interested in sites in Eureka. And so as that kind of keeps progressing, it was a worthwhile thing to do. It really, I'm glad we did it and look forward to participating in the future and to continue building those relationships.
Can I just add, because is your next slide about this, or are you changing to the next item?
I was going to change to the next slide.
Okay, before you change,
Okay.
I just want to say I was at the Power CA conference, and there were, it was a pretty good turnout, and there were international businesses there, and some pretty big people from big agencies, and I agree. I think it was a great opportunity, and I could hear people talking about how impressed they were about the City of Eureka tour. I think it was really special that we were able to offer something like that at conference. I feel like that's pretty unusual. So just wanted to share my appreciation and thinking that you guys did a great job.
Thank you. And then I'm going to pass this over to Amanda to talk about the events that we've been having going on. But before we do, I'm going to talk about We are going to have our grand opening for our visitor center is going to become a Visit California Welcome Center. And so I've sent you an invitation, and I see a typo in my invite. It's going to be August 28th. And we just recently hit a milestone at the visitor center. Usually our numbers are 12 to 14,000 per year. The week of 4th of July, we had 1,000 people come through the visitor center. So that was really exciting. And now I'll pass it to Amanda.
Hello, everybody. So it is definitely summertime, which is event season around here. So as you have probably noticed, the farmers markets are back in Henderson Center and Old Town. Henderson Center runs on Thursdays from 10 to 1, and in Old Town, they're on Tuesdays from 10 to 1. Upcoming, we have Get Out and Play Day on July 27th, where there is free activities throughout the city, which is a really fun event for families and everybody to get out and experience the assets that we have. We have the Friday night markets every Friday night in Old Town. There's a picture, that might be 4th of July. But that's running in Old Town, and that's going through every Friday through August 22nd. And we also have the summer concert series that is still happening down at Mattocket Plaza, and those happen every Thursday from 6 to 8. And on August 11th, Sunday, August 11th, is the 9th running of the Humboldt Bay Marathon, which is solely done in Eureka, and it is a Boston qualifier. I think it's one of the last Boston qualifiers to qualify for the Boston Marathon. So those are all fun things that are happening. And then also coming up soon in September is also a big event time. We have the CannaFest is happening again down at Halverson Park on September 7th and 8th. And we'll also have the cruise in Eureka, which will be, I think it's the 8th and 9th. So there's lots of fun things happening. And also we have the California Main Street Conference, the annual conference, will be held here in Eureka this year. And that will be at the Wharfinger Building. And it will be September 16th through the 18th. And we'll send an invitation out to all of you. We'd like you all to be able to attend if you'd like. And so that's an exciting thing. Something that's drawing in Main Street professionals and leaders and business owners from throughout the state. And there will be some national Main Street people that will be coming out to talk, to do sessions as well. So it's that's exciting. So that's what we have going on.
And putting on my art and culture hat for a minute, I feel like my brain separates econ dev and art and culture, but it's all interwoven. We have a couple projects that are about to be happening throughout Eureka, so you'll be seeing some visible art happening. So we have the Eureka Street Art Festival. It's the final year, July 29th to August 2nd. There's going to be 15 murals painted throughout the city, and 13 ceramic banana slugs. And then Sarah has been working on a Clean California Caltrans grant that we received to repaint 32 utility boxes along the 101 corridor. And then we've also been working on Caltrans, working with Caltrans on a Clean California grant. We're going to be lighting up the 4 murals under the Samoa Bridge. So like the orange pillar will be lit orange, purple will be lit purple, blue will be lit blue, and green will be lit green. And then we've been working with Caltrans on the Herrick Gateway signage, the Welcome to Eureka signage. and they came up with some preliminary designs, but then they had some project savings from other projects that they rolled over to the project, and so that now has additional funding, and so they are now redesigning at a bigger scale because we'll be able to afford something better. So that'll be going out for a public poll in the near future, and hopefully, like, the plan is to get that done this summer. So that's like right now.
One more thing, the Eureka Cultural Arts District is also doing their big kickoff sometime in August. I don't remember, mid-August, the 19th possibly.
I think it's the 18th.
18th.
I think it's the 18th.
Oh, I do. I have it. It's the 16th, August 16th. So we've been a cultural arts district, or we've had a cultural arts district since 2017. But with the redesignation this year, we've added the Wiat tribe as a partner, and we've created a leadership council so that we can help distribute the funds that we've gotten through from the state for that. And so we'll have a lot more activity happening in the district, which is primarily like downtown, Old Town area. And so you're going to start seeing a lot more exciting cultural and artistic things happening. So you'll want to attend to that and pay attention to what's going on with the Cultural Arts District too.
Thank you.
Also, it's August currently right now.
I will update all those things.
As we're looking at all these amazing improvements downtown, I just want to bring back up the idea of more seating. I know that that's controversial, but it's always been dear to my heart as an idea that we have some immovable chairs and little like cafe tables at our plazas and along the waterfront. I mean, we have them along the waterfront, but more. So just throw that out there. I hope that that's being considered and will be developed in the future.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that because I know Friday night markets I love going to, and a lot of people are wandering around with their food, and not knowing where to go to sit and eat. So you end up sitting on the sidewalk or the curb, which isn't always the most pleasant place to sit. So
yeah, I'll third that. I mean, particularly like right now, like we have that big C Street gravel lot, and I'm like, man, God, I could do so many cool things in there that aren't just for cars.
Okay, sorry. I
No,
know you've got
that's
your next item.
worthwhile. Thank you. And then lastly, in January, we talked about what to prioritize this year, and we talked about some of the limitations of staff. And I'm excited to say that with this last budget process, we have been funded to hire 3 more people. So we are also going to be expanding into a community relations communication role. And so we will be hiring an additional economic development position and then 2 communication positions because we agree that we want to share those good stories that are all over Eureka better. So we're really excited. It feels like it really overlaps with all of our tourism efforts. And so this is a plane that we're building as we're flying, but we're really excited about the direction. And I hope the commission will see good stuff in the next few months from us. So it is going to take us a little while to get our momentum up. Hiring at the city takes a while, but we're going in the right direction. And that's it from me.
Can I have a question on that? Will these? Congratulations, by the way. That's very exciting. That's big. 3 staff. That's huge. Will the new staff assignments just be kind of rearranged and expanded from what other staff are currently doing? Do you know yet, like, what their duties are?
Yeah, so one will be an economic development project manager position, which is kind of what I do. And so that will be shared between the two of us. And then we'll be hiring for the 2 communication positions. There's going to be a communication coordinator role, which will be kind of an unofficial PIO for the city, and we'll be kind of organizing all the PIOs within the different departments. And then there will be a media coordinator, which will really be our content creator. And so I think, you know, in strategic visioning for city council, I just think across the board, we all want to do a better job at communicating what the city is doing and what's going on in Eureka. And so that's really the focus of what we're doing. But it is a division that we are building from scratch. And so it's just going to take time to do it right. And so I think it'll be a little slow as we roll it out. But I think as we get momentum, it'll be like all good things, you know, it takes time to build a really good thing. So I'm excited, but it'll be a slow rollout.
I've talked with you about this before, the economic development department's priorities and projects and how overloaded you guys are. So again, it's great that you got new staff. I'm just wondering if there's anything that we can do to help with you know, examining the priorities as some of these responsibilities are shuffled around and maybe some things are expanded, if that's something that maybe the commission can look at and make a recommendation to council to consider as assignments are given to the department and things change over there.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful when strategic visioning happens. That's really when things are assigned to different departments. So having this commission have awareness of what we're working on and speaking up at the strategic visioning moments about what they would like to see prioritized, I think would be helpful. I think the transition of the commission meeting to quarterly has definitely been helpful for staff. I feel like I've been able to attend more things because of that. So I feel like just having that open communication, we're open. We want to serve Eureka well. And I appreciate that I'm able to just be so candid with you all about things. And I think if we can just all keep talking about it as we go. I also want to mention our Commissioner Pamela Cosell. She is now working for us at the Visitor Center as a concierge, so she is no longer on the commission. So I am recruiting for the commission because we're just down to 5 of you, and that makes making quorum really hard. But I would say big picture, I feel like you guys have hung in there with us during kind of a bumpy time. But we're like now on the upswing of it, and I think we're all going in a good direction, and we can just keep having that conversation and checking in. I want this to be worthwhile for you all too. Let's do good stuff together or not do it.
Thanks. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, switching back to the agenda, so you're finished with reports and communications, I'm assuming? Moving on to oral communications. Does anyone on the commission have anything they'd like to share? I did mention earlier I went to the Power CA conference. We have a lot of really cool events in Eureka. But that was just another example, and I was really impressed that, you know, Humboldt County, I guess like with offshore wind, it's kind of obvious that there's going to be a lot of international and national interest, but it is just really exciting and impressive that we held such an event here, and the county did a great job, and there was a lot of really like powerful and interesting people there. So it was a really cool event. Just wanted to share that. Looking forward to future opportunities. With that, a very dense and interesting meeting. Are we good to adjourn? Nothing else? Okay.
You gotta hit your mallet.
Officially adjourned? Are we good?
You gotta bang your mallet.
I'm not gonna. Definitely not gonna bang mallet. Okay.
Come on. Come on. There you go. Come on. We gotta work on that.